The crack of a dinner plate shattering against the hardwood floor of Provo's busiest saloon was the least of Nora Thompson's worries as she scrambled to clean up the mess. It was 1885, and surviving in this dusty Utah Territory town meant working until your fingers bled and your back ached with the weight of exhaustion. "That's the second plate this week, Miss Thompson," Mr. Sullivan barked from behind the bar, his thick mustache twitching with annoyance. "Comes out of your wages." Nora bit her tongue and nodded, sweeping the jagged white fragments into a small pile. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours already, starting before dawn at the general store where she stocked shelves, then rushing to the laundry where she pressed shirts until her arms trembled, before finally donning an apron at Sullivan's saloon for the evening shift. 3 jobs, barely enough to keep a roof over her head and food in her belly. "I understand, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Another deduction meant another day of going hungry. At 24, Nora had never imagined this would be her life. After her father died 2 years prior, leaving nothing but debts in their small homestead outside town, she'd been forced to sell the property for a pittance and move into a tiny room above the livery. Dreams of marriage, children, and a home of her own had faded like the Utah sunset, replaced by the grinding reality of day-to-day survival. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of early autumn air and the silhouette of a man Nora didn't recognize. Tall and broad-shouldered, he removed his hat as he entered, revealing dark hair and features weathered by sun and wind. His clothes, while dusty from the trail, were of good quality, a cattleman, perhaps, or a rancher. "Whiskey," he said to Sullivan, his voice deep and calm. As he sat at the bar, his eyes drifted to where Nora knelt on the floor, still gathering shards of porcelain. "You all right there, madam?" he asked. "Just fine, sir," Nora replied, not meeting his gaze. She'd learned that engaging too much with the saloon patrons only invited trouble. "Clumsy girl," Sullivan muttered. "Been working here 6 months and still drops more than she serves." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. "Looks to me like your floor's uneven right there." He pointed with a gloved hand. "Caught the edge of my boot, too, when I walked in." Sullivan grunted noncommittally and poured the whiskey. Nora shot the stranger a grateful glance before hurrying back to her duties, serving drinks and dodging wandering hands with practiced efficiency. Hours later, as the night wound down, Nora found the stranger still at the bar, nursing what must have been only his second drink. He'd been watching the room with careful eyes, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book. "Last call," Sullivan announced, and most of the remaining patrons drained their glasses and stumbled toward the door. The stranger approached Nora as she wiped down a table. "Pardon me," he said, his hat in his hands. "I couldn't help noticing you seem to be working mighty hard here." Nora straightened, tucking a loose strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "Just doing my job, sir." "Name's Dawson Vance," he said, offering his hand. "I've got a ranch about 20 miles north of here." Hesitantly, she shook it. "Nora Thompson." "Miss Thompson, I heard the barkeep mention this is your 3rd job of the day?" Nora stiffened. "I manage just fine." Dawson nodded, respect evident in his blue-gray eyes. "No doubt. But I've got a proposition for you, if you'd hear me out." She glanced toward Sullivan, who was watching them with narrowed eyes. "I should finish closing up." "I'll be quick," Dawson promised. "I need someone to cook and keep house at my ranch. The pay's good, better than these 3 jobs combined, I'd wager. Plus room and board." Nora's heart skipped a beat. Better pay? A place to live that wasn't a drafty room hardly bigger than a closet? It sounded too good to be true. "Why me? We've only just met." Dawson smiled slightly. "I've been watching you work. You're efficient, careful despite what happened with that plate, and you handle difficult customers with grace. Those are qualities I value." "I don't know the first thing about ranch work," she admitted. "You'd learn. What I'm offering isn't just a job, Miss Thompson. It's a chance to build something. Work with me, build with me. I've got plans to make my place the finest cattle operation in the territory, but I can't do it alone." Sullivan's voice cut through their conversation. "Girl, stop jawing and finish those tables." Nora flinched. "I should go." Think about it, Dawson said, placing a card on the table. I'm staying at the hotel until tomorrow afternoon. My offer stands until then. With that, he nodded politely and left, leaving Nora staring at the card in her hand, heart pounding with possibilities and fears in equal measure. The next morning, Nora woke before dawn as usual, her body aching from yesterday's labors. As she splashed cold water on her face from the basin, her eyes fell on Dawson's card lying on her small table. Vance Ranch, it read simply, with directions sketched on the back. At the general store, Mr. Peterson greeted her with his usual grunt as she tied her apron and began unpacking crates of canned goods. "You're looking peaky, girl," Mrs. Peterson commented as she swept the front porch. "Not sleeping again?" "I'm fine," Nora assured her, though in truth she'd lain awake most of the night, turning Dawson Vance's offer over in her mind. It was madness to consider it. A single woman going to live at a remote ranch with a man she'd just met? What would people think? What if his intentions weren't honorable? Yet what was her alternative? Work herself to death for wages that barely kept her alive? "Nora!" Mr. Peterson snapped. "You've stacked those cans all wrong. Pay attention." By midday, when she hurried to the laundry, Nora had made her decision. If Dawson Vance's offer was genuine, she would accept it. She could always return to town if things didn't work out. Mrs. Hollis at the laundry greeted her with a mountain of shirts to press. "The mining company sent extra today," she explained apologetically. Nora nodded and set to work, the iron heavy in her hand as steam rose around her face. She pressed methodically, her mind made up but her heart still uncertain. When her shift ended, instead of heading to the saloon, she walked briskly to the hotel. The clerk raised an eyebrow when she asked for Mr. Vance. "He's in the dining room," the man said, eyeing her worn dress with barely disguised disdain. Nora found Dawson at a corner table eating a steak dinner. He stood immediately when he saw her. "Miss Thompson," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, "please join me." "I can't stay long," she said, remaining standing. "I've come to accept your offer, Mr. Vance, provided the terms are fair and you can give me references." A smile broke across his face, transforming his weathered features. "Of course. I've written everything down here." He handed her a folded paper. "As for references, speak to Sheriff Mason. He's known me since I came to the territory 10 years ago." Nora scanned the document. The salary was indeed generous, 3 times what she earned now. Room and board provided, Sundays off, and a clause stating she could leave at any time if the arrangement didn't suit her. "When would you want me to start?" she asked, hardly believing she was considering this. "I'll be heading back tomorrow. Can you be ready by then?" Nora took a deep breath. "Yes, I have very few possessions." Dawson nodded. "We'll leave at 10. Meet me at the livery." That evening, Nora faced the wrath of Mr. Sullivan when she told him she was leaving. He called her ungrateful, threatened to spread rumors about her character, but finally grudgingly paid her what she was owed when she stood her ground. Mrs. Hollis and the Petersons were more understanding, though concerned. "A ranch hand is no husband, Nora," Mrs. Peterson warned, "and a woman needs security." "I'm not looking for a husband," Nora replied, "just better work." That night she packed her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a shawl, her mother's Bible, and a small tin of keepsakes. Everything fit into a single carpet bag with room to spare. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Nora paid her final week's rent to the livery owner, ignoring his insinuating comments about her new position, and walked to meet Dawson. He was already there, loading supplies into a wagon. Beside it stood a saddled bay horse. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he said, taking her bag. "Ready for a new adventure?" Nora looked back at the town of Provo, at the buildings that had been the backdrop to 2 years of grinding hardship. "Yes," she said with sudden certainty. "I believe I am." The journey to Vance Ranch took most of the day. Dawson rode his horse alongside the wagon, which Nora drove under his guidance. As they traveled, he told her about the ranch, 500 acres of good grazing land, 300 head of cattle, a sturdy main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. "It's nothing fancy," he cautioned, "but it's got good bones. My father started it 20 years ago, came out from Missouri with nothing but determination. I took over after he passed 5 years back." "Do you have family there?" Nora asked carefully. "Just ranch hands, 4 regulars, plus extra help during roundup and branding. Good men, hard working. They bunk together, so you'll have privacy in the main house." By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and Dawson pointed ahead. There it is, Vance Ranch. Below them stretched a valley, green despite the late season, with a creek running through it. Nestled against a backdrop of low hills stood a collection of buildings the ranch Dawson had described. As they approached, Nora felt a flutter of nervousness. What had she done, leaving everything familiar behind? Yet as the wagon rolled into the yard, and she saw the solid house with smoke curling from its chimney, a sense of rightness settled over her. A tall, lean man emerged from the barn, followed by a younger one. "That's Hank," Dawson explained, "my foreman, and that's Charlie, newest hand." Hank approached, eyeing Nora curiously. "Boss, this the housekeeper you mentioned?" "Miss Nora Thompson," Dawson confirmed, helping her down from the wagon. "Miss Thompson, Hank Miller's been with Vance Ranch since my father's time." Hank tipped his hat. "Madam, glad to have you. Things have been a mite disorganized since Mrs. Wilkins left us." "Thank you," Nora said, straightening her skirts. "I look forward to setting things in order." Dawson showed her to a room small but clean, with a real bed, chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the yard. It was larger than her room in town and infinitely more comfortable. "Kitchen's through there," he said, pointing. "Pantry's stocked best I could manage. Anything else you need, just let me know." Left alone, Nora sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the day's changes. Then, squaring her shoulders, she unpacked her few belongings and set about exploring the kitchen. It was well appointed if somewhat disorganized, with a good stove, ample workspace, and enough provisions to last weeks. Clearly, Dawson Vance ran a successful operation. By the time the men came in for dinner, she had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, biscuits, and apple pie made from preserved fruit she'd found. "Miss Thompson," Dawson said, amazement in his voice as he surveyed the table, "you've worked miracles already." The other hands Hank, Charlie, and 2 more men introduced as Ned, and Tobias murmured appreciative comments as they took their seats. "It's nothing fancy," Nora said, echoing Dawson's earlier words about the ranch. "It's the first home-cooked meal we've had in months," Tobias declared, helping himself to a biscuit. That night, after cleaning up, Nora stood on the porch and gazed at stars brighter than she'd ever seen them in town. The vastness of the land around her was both frightening and exhilarating. "Different view than Provo," Dawson said, startling her as he joined her. "Yes," she agreed. "Beautiful." "I hope you'll be happy here, Miss Thompson." Nora turned to him, studying his face in the moonlight. "I hope so too, Mr. Vance." In the days that followed, Nora settled into her role at the ranch. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the house, afternoons cooking and baking, and evenings mending and planning for the next day. It was hard work, but different from her jobs in town. Here, she had autonomy. Dawson never criticized or micromanaged her, instead expressing genuine appreciation for her efforts. "The place hasn't looked this good since my mother was alive," he told her one evening as she set a loaf of fresh bread on the table. Nora found herself observing him when he wasn't looking. Dawson Vance was a contradiction, a hard-working rancher with calloused hands who nonetheless read poetry by lamplight. He treated his men firmly but fairly, and she never heard him raise his voice in anger. Gradually, as autumn deepened toward winter, Nora began to feel something dangerous stirring in her heart. She tamped it down ruthlessly. She was an employee, nothing more, and allowing herself to develop feelings for her employer would only lead to disaster. One blustery November day, as the first snow threatened, Dawson found Nora in the kitchen, kneading dough with more force than necessary. "Something troubling you?" he asked, warming his hands by the stove. Nora shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. She'd received a letter that morning from Mrs. Peterson, full of town gossip and pointed remarks about Nora's situation with an unmarried rancher. "You're a terrible liar," Dawson said, his tone gentle. "Tell me what's wrong. Have the men been disrespectful?" "No, they've been perfect gentlemen," she sighed, dusting flour from her hands. "It's nothing really. Just a letter from town with some unkind implications." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "About you working here." "People talk," Nora said simply. Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "Does it bother you? What they say?" "It shouldn't," she admitted, "but it does. I've always tried to live properly, even when times were hard. Your reputation matters to you." "It's all I have," she said softly. Dawson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. Perhaps—" he hesitated. "Perhaps we should hire another woman, a companion for you, to quiet the gossips." The suggestion, so considerate of her feelings, nearly brought tears to Nora's eyes. "That's very kind, but unnecessary. I know the truth of my situation, and so do you. That will have to be enough." Snow began to fall that night, and by morning the ranch was blanketed in white. Winter had arrived in earnest, bringing with it new challenges. The men worked tirelessly to ensure the cattle were fed and protected from the elements, while Nora kept the house warm and the meals hot. December brought Christmas preparations. To Nora's surprise, Dawson insisted on celebrating properly. "We'll need a tree," he declared one evening, "and trimmings. I've ordered some things from town, but we can make decorations too." The next day, he and Charlie returned with a perfect pine tree, which they set up in the corner of the main room. Nora found herself cutting paper snowflakes and stringing popcorn garlands, while Hank whittled small wooden ornaments. Even the usually taciturn Ned joined in, fashioning a star for the top of the tree from bits of tin. On Christmas Eve, after the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Dawson presented Nora with a small package. "It isn't much," he said almost shyly, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "For your thoughts," he explained. "I've noticed you're always scribbling on scraps of paper." Touched, Nora handed him the scarf she'd knitted in secret moments over the past weeks. "And this is for you, to keep you warm on the range." Their fingers brushed as they exchanged gifts, and Nora felt that dangerous feeling surge again in her chest. "Merry Christmas, Nora," Dawson said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Merry Christmas, Dawson," she replied, allowing herself this small intimacy. January brought bitter cold and a blizzard that trapped them all indoors for 3 days. The men played cards and told stories, while Nora baked and mended and tried not to notice how often Dawson's eyes sought her out across the room. By February, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Dawson Vance, his integrity, his kindness, his quiet strength. Everything about him drew her like a moth to flame. But she kept her feelings locked away, certain they could never be returned. One evening, as she sat by the fire darning socks, Dawson settled into the chair opposite her. "Spring will be here soon," he remarked. "I've been thinking about expanding the herd, maybe building a new corral on the north pasture." "That sounds like a good plan," Nora replied, focused on her mending. "I'd like your opinion on something else, too," he continued. "I'm considering building an addition to the house, another bedroom, maybe a proper sitting room." Nora looked up, surprised. "Are you expecting family to visit?" A curious expression crossed his face. "No, not exactly. More planning for the future." Before she could ask what he meant, there was a commotion outside. Hank burst through the door, his face grim. "Boss, rustlers! They've cut through the east fence and taken at least 20 head, trails still fresh." Dawson was on his feet instantly. "Get the men saddled up. We'll track them." "Dawson," Nora said, alarm rising in her voice. "It's dark and the temperature's dropping." "We can't let them get away with it," he replied, already pulling on his coat. "Don't wait up. This might take a while." The men rode out into the night, leaving Nora to worry and wait. She kept the fire burning and coffee hot, pacing between the window and the door until her legs ached. Hours passed with no sign of them. As dawn approached, Nora dozed fitfully in Dawson's chair, starting awake at every creak and rustle. Finally, as morning light broke over the horizon, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Rushing to the door, she saw the men returning all but one. "Where's Dawson?" she asked, fear clutching at her heart as Hank dismounted. "Taken the rustlers to the sheriff," Hank explained, his face haggard with exhaustion. "We caught them trying to cross the river. Dawson got winged, but he'll be fine." "Winged?" Nora repeated, her voice rising. "He's been shot?" "Just a graze," Hank assured her. "He insisted on taking the prisoners in himself. Said he'd be back by noon." The morning crawled by. Nora prepared a hearty breakfast for the exhausted hands, then set about making a poultice and gathering bandages, her mind filled with terrible scenarios. When at last she heard a horse approaching, she ran to the porch, her heart in her throat. Dawson looked pale and drawn as he dismounted stiffly. His left arm held awkwardly against his side. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to him. "It's nothing," he insisted, though his grimace betrayed him. "The sheriff has the rustlers locked up. They won't bother us again." Inside, despite his protests, she made him remove his coat and shirt to reveal a bloody bandage wrapped hastily around his upper arm. "Dawson Vance, this is not nothing," she scolded, carefully unwrapping the cloth to reveal an angry furrow where a bullet had grazed his flesh. "I've had worse shaving," he joked, then winced as she began cleaning the wound. "This needs stitches," she declared. To her surprise, he nodded meekly. "I trust you." With steady hands and a sterilized needle, Nora sewed the wound closed, her heart aching at each flinch he couldn't quite suppress. "There," she said finally, tying off the thread. "Keep it clean and try not to use that arm too much for a few days." "Yes, madam," he replied, his voice warm with something that made her cheeks heat. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. "I was worried about you," she admitted softly. Dawson reached out with his good hand and gently touched her cheek. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you. Just be more careful," she whispered, her resolve weakening under his tender gaze. "The ranch needs you." "Only the ranch?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Before she could answer, the door opened, and Charlie entered with an armful of firewood. The moment shattered, and Nora stepped back, her professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Rest," she ordered Dawson. "I'll bring you some broth." In the days that followed, Dawson obeyed her instructions, allowing his arm to heal while delegating more work to Hank and the others. Nora fussed over him despite herself, bringing him books to read and sitting with him in the evenings while she mended or knitted. As March arrived, bringing the first signs of spring, Dawson grew restless. One morning, she found him in the barn, attempting to saddle his horse one-handed. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, hands on her hips. "I need to check the north pasture," he explained. "The creek might be flooding with the snowmelt." "Then ask Hank to do it," she countered. "Your arm isn't fully healed." "I've been cooped up for weeks," he protested. "I need to get out, feel the sun on my face." Nora sighed in exasperation. "At least, let me help you with that saddle before you hurt yourself again." Together, they saddled his horse, their hands brushing occasionally in a way that sent sparks through Nora's veins. "Come with me," Dawson suggested suddenly. "It's a beautiful day. You've been cooped up too." The invitation was tempting. "I have bread to bake," she demurred. "The bread can wait," he insisted. "When's the last time you just enjoyed the day?" Unable to remember, Nora relented. Soon she found herself riding behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist as they followed the creek north. The land was coming alive after winter's sleep. Green shoots pushed through the melting snow, and birds called from budding trees. As they rode, Dawson pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his childhood on the ranch. My father taught me to fish right here, he said as they stopped beside a pool where the creek widened. Caught my first trout when I was 8. I thought I was the richest boy in the territory. Nora smiled, enchanted by this glimpse into his past. It must have been wonderful growing up here. It was, he agreed, helping her dismount, though lonely at times. No brothers or sisters, and the nearest neighbors were miles away. They walked along the bank, Dawson occasionally stopping to check the water level or clear debris. "What about your childhood?" he asked. "You've never spoken much about your family." Nora hesitated, then found herself opening up. "My father was a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity. We moved around a lot: Missouri, Kansas, finally Utah. My mother died when I was 16, fever. After that, it was just the two of us trying to make the homestead work." "And then he passed too," Dawson said gently. She nodded. 2 years ago, heart gave out. The debts, I couldn't keep the place. That's how I ended up working those 3 jobs in Provo." "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes full of genuine compassion. "That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry alone." "I managed," she said simply. "Yes, you did." The admiration in his voice made her look away, flustered. They continued walking, eventually stopping on a small rise overlooking the valley. The ranch buildings were visible in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dawson said, standing close beside her. "Very," she agreed, not entirely referring to the view. "Nora," he began, his voice different somehow. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Her heart stuttered. "Yes?" "When I asked you to come work for me, I said I wanted you to build with me. I meant that." "I know," she said, uncertain where this was leading. "And I've tried to help improve things around the house." "That's not what I meant," he interrupted gently. "Or not all of it, anyway." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. Not just the house, though. You've made it a home again. You've changed me." Nora could scarcely breathe. "Dawson, Please let me finish," he said, his eyes earnest. "I know this isn't proper. You're employed by me, and there's a trust there I don't want to break, but I can't go on pretending I don't feel what I feel." He took a deep breath. "I'm in love with you, Nora Thompson. I think I started falling the moment I saw you in that saloon, working harder than anyone had a right to ask, and every day since then, I've fallen deeper." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, joy and fear warring within her. "This can't happen," she whispered. "I'm your housekeeper." "No," he said firmly. "You're the woman I want to share my life with, if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, revealed a simple but beautiful gold ring with a small diamond. "This was my mother's," he explained. "Nora Thompson, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not my employee, but my partner in everything?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "People will talk. They'll say I set out to trap you, or that you took advantage." "Let them talk," he said, brushing the tear away with his thumb. "We know the truth. And the truth is, I love you. I want to build this ranch with you, have a family with you, grow old with you." "I love you too," she admitted, the words rushing out as if they'd been waiting too long to be spoken. "I've tried not to, but I can't help it." "Then say yes," he urged, hope blazing in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Dawson Vance, I will marry you." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a tender kiss that spoke of promises and tomorrows. They were married in April, with spring in full bloom across the ranch. Sheriff Mason came from town to stand as witness, along with a few neighbors from surrounding properties. Hank served as best man, beaming with approval, while the other hands scrubbed up and donned their Sunday best. The ceremony was simple, held in the main room of the house that was now truly Nora's home. She wore a new dress of pale blue silk, Dawson's wedding gift, with wildflowers in her hair. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the traveling minister declared, and Dawson kissed her with such reverence that Nora felt her heart might burst with happiness. Afterwards, they celebrated with a feast she'd prepared over the previous days, with the help of a neighboring rancher's wife. There was music from Charlie's fiddle, dancing, and more laughter than the old house had heard in years. That night, as Dawson carried her across the threshold of the bedroom, their bedroom now, Nora felt a sense of coming home that went beyond physical places. "Mrs. Vance," he murmured against her hair. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. Spring gave way to summer, and Nora embraced her new role as rancher's wife. She still kept house, but now she also rode out with Dawson occasionally, learning the business side of the ranch. Together, they planned improvements, the addition to the house, a new barn, better irrigation for the south pasture. In July, Nora confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. She found Dawson in the corral, training a young horse, and waited until he finished before approaching. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. He looked at her quizzically, wiping sweat from his brow. "Good news, I hope?" "The best," she replied, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed his features was something Nora knew she would remember all her days. He lifted her and spun her around, careful despite his excitement. "When?" he asked, setting her gently back on her feet. "February, the doctor thinks." Dawson kissed her soundly, then stepped back with a sudden look of concern. "Are you feeling well? Should you be resting?" "What did the doctor say about—" Nora laughed, cutting off his worried questions. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Dawson Vance. I'm healthy and strong." "Yes, you are," he agreed, his eyes shining with love. "The strongest woman I know." The months that followed were busy ones. Dawson insisted on completing the house addition before the baby arrived, working alongside the carpenter he'd hired from Provo. Nora prepared a nursery, sewing tiny garments and dreaming of the child who would wear them. Word spread about their coming blessing, and neighbors began to visit more frequently. Mrs. Peterson sent a letter of congratulations, her previous concerns apparently forgotten. As winter settled over the ranch once more, Nora's body rounded with new life. Dawson was endearingly protective, insisting she rest often and hiring a girl from town, Jenny, to help with the heavier housework. "You're spoiling me," Nora protested one evening as he massaged her swollen feet by the fire. "I'm taking care of what's most precious to me," he countered, "you and our child." February arrived with surprisingly mild weather. On the morning of the 15th, Nora woke to the first pangs of labor. By nightfall, after hours of effort, she held their son in her arms, a robust baby with a tuft of dark hair like his father's. "He's perfect," Dawson whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, his finger caught in the baby's tiny grip. "What shall we call him?" "Daniel," Nora suggested. "After your father." Dawson's eyes glistened. "Daniel Thompson Vance. It's a good, strong name." As spring returned to the land, the ranch flourished under their combined care. Dawson's plans for expansion proceeded apace, while Nora balanced motherhood with her contributions to the ranch's management. Daniel grew stronger daily, a happy baby with his father's curious eyes and his mother's determined spirit. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel sleeping peacefully in Nora's arms, Dawson took her free hand in his. "Do you ever think about how we met?" he asked. "How different our lives might have been?" Nora nodded. "I think about it often. If you hadn't come into that saloon that night. If you hadn't dropped that plate," he added with a smile. She laughed softly. "I was exhausted. 3 jobs will do that to a person." "You were extraordinary," Dawson said, his voice warm with admiration. "Still are." "It wasn't all bad," she reflected. "Those hard times taught me what I'm capable of. But this—" she looked around at their home, their land, their sleeping son. "This is more than I ever dared to hope for." "We built this together," Dawson reminded her, echoing his words from that first meeting. "And we'll keep building. For Daniel, for ourselves, maybe for more children someday. I'd like that, Nora said, resting her head on his shoulder. More children, more years, more of everything with you. As the last light faded from the sky, they sat in contented silence, two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, the foundation of something lasting and true. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The ranch prospered under their care, with the cattle herd growing and new hands hired to manage the increased workload. Daniel took his first steps in August, toddling unsteadily across the kitchen floor into his father's waiting arms. In the fall, they hosted a harvest celebration, inviting neighbors from miles around. The house and yard were filled with music, laughter, and the warm sense of community that Nora had once thought lost to her forever. "You've changed this place," Hank told her as they watched Dawson showing Daniel to an admiring group of women. "It wasn't just a ranch before. Now it's the heart of something bigger." Nora smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. Under their stewardship, Vance Ranch had become not just a successful business, but a gathering place, a home that extended beyond its physical boundaries to encompass friends, neighbors, and the future they were building. As the years passed, that future unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. A daughter, Eliza, joined their family in 1888, followed by twins James and Joseph in 1890. The house expanded again to accommodate their growing brood, and Nora's days were filled with the joyful chaos of raising 4 children while helping Dawson manage what had become one of the most respected ranches in the territory. By the turn of the century, as Utah celebrated its statehood, Daniel was 15 and preparing to attend school back east, something neither of his parents had experienced, but both had determined their children would have the opportunity to pursue. "I'm going to learn everything I can," he promised, "then come back and help run the ranch better than ever." "We're counting on it," Dawson told him, pride evident in his voice. On the evening before Daniel's departure, the family gathered for a special dinner. Looking around the table at her children's faces, Daniel so serious and grown up, Eliza with her mother's honey-brown hair and gentle spirit, the twins with their father's adventurous nature. Nora felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Later, as she and Dawson prepared for bed, he noticed her pensive mood. "What is it, love?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "I was just thinking about how full my life is," she said. "Remember when we met? I was barely surviving, working those 3 jobs, no hope of anything better." Dawson kissed her forehead. "And now look at you, rancher's wife, mother of 4, respected by everyone who knows you." "It's not just what I have," she explained. "It's what we've built together. This ranch, our family, the life we share. When you found me in that saloon and said, 'Work with me, build with me,' I never imagined what it would really mean." "Neither did I," he admitted. "I knew I needed help with the ranch. I had no idea I was finding the other half of my soul." Nora leaned into his embrace, marveling at how, after 15 years of marriage, his touch still sent warmth cascading through her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing something in me that day, for giving me the chance to become more than I was." "Nora Vance," he said, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. "You were always extraordinary. All I did was recognize it." As they settled into bed, hands clasped in the darkness, Nora reflected on the journey from that desperate young woman working 3 jobs to the person she was now loved, fulfilled, and still building a life with the man who had seen her potential when she could barely see it herself. Outside their window, the vast Utah sky blazed with stars, witnesses to the love story that had begun with a broken plate and a simple proposition, and had grown into something as enduring as the land itself. 10 years later, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together family, friends, and neighbors from across the county, Dawson stood to offer a toast. "To my Nora," he said, raising his glass, his hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes as bright as ever. The woman who made not just a house, but a home. Not just a ranch, but a legacy. Not just a marriage, but a lifetime of joy. Daniel, now managing half the ranch operations while pursuing innovations he'd learned about during his schooling, stood with his own wife beside him. Eliza, recently graduated from college, something almost unheard of for a woman, beamed at her parents. The twins, tall and strong at 20, flanked their mother protectively as always. When I asked her to work with me, build with me, Dawson continued, I offered her a job. But she gave me so much more, a partnership that has made everything in my life richer and more meaningful. Nora rose to stand beside him, taking his hand. And when I accepted, she added, I was looking for security. What I found was love, purpose, and the family I'd always dreamed of. As they looked out at the faces of those who had shared their journey, Hank, now retired but still a regular visitor, Charlie, who had his own small spread nearby, the new generation of hands who knew the Vance name, stood for integrity and fair dealing, and most precious of all, their children and grandchildren, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. From those hard-scrabble days in Provo to this abundant life they'd created together, every step had led them here. Every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated, every quiet moment shared had woven the fabric of a love that had not just endured, but deepened with time. To building together, Dawson said, his voice thick with emotion, yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. To building together, the gathering echoed, glasses raised in the golden light of a Utah sunset. And as Nora looked into the eyes of the man who had changed her life with a simple offer and a steadfast heart, she knew that the best part of what they'd built was not the prosperous ranch or even their wonderful family, but the love that had made it all possible, a love as vast as the western sky and as enduring as the land they had nurtured together.